Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. And if there are any English viewers, listeners out there, I'd like to wish them all a happy St. George's Day. I'm not English myself, but my children are half English and actually 3/4 British. You don't see the St. George's flag very much in England because the elite has decided that it's racist somehow. But in any event, again, happy St. George's Day. I thought I would start off today by talking about models. No, not the kind that sell clothes, but the other kind. The kind that is responsible for the COVID-19 panic, the sanitary dictatorship. I want to go back to a piece by Christopher Ferrara that I mentioned yesterday that appeared in the Remnant newspaper. And this is what he has to say about models. In particular, Tony and Deborah, that is doctors Fauci and Birx, have staked their claim to authority largely on the Bill Gates-funded IHME model, which now stands thoroughly discredited. Fox News, suddenly far less of a cheerleader for the panic narrative, as I discussed below, has just reported, citing Stat News, that the model's constantly lowering predictions now predict a death toll with an estimated range of 34,063 to 140,381 as of last Friday, down from the original 2.2 million without mitigation and 240,000 with mitigation, and several more downward adjustments in between. The lower number of the latest estimate is now rather conveniently in the neighborhood of the reported and greatly inflated U.S. death toll as of April the 20th. The actual inflated death toll, around 42,000, is entirely consistent with an above average, but not extraordinarily bad seasonal flu. So he continues, what we now know beyond any reasonable doubt is that the IHME model is junk science that even the respected epidemiologists cited by Fox and Stat News now depict as essentially a scientific fraud. Epidemiologist Ruth Etzioni of the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center frankly exposes the fraud that has convulsed the nation. Quote, that the IHME model keeps changing is evidence of its lack of reliability as a predictive tool, that it is being used for policy decisions and its results interpreted wrongly is a travesty unfolding before our eyes. Moreover, as the report by Stat News summarizes, Etzioni is concerned because the fact that they, that is the IHME, overshot, initially projecting up to 240,000 U.S. deaths compared with fewer than 70,000 now, will be used to suggest that the government response prevented an even greater catastrophe when in fact the predictions were shaky in the first place. Yet for weeks, Tony and Deborah employed the worthless IHME model to justify massive destruction of the national economy with the assistance of, it should be obvious by now, their Democrat allies in the media, the governorships, the county bureaucracies, the big city mayoralties, and the Congress. Another lying defender of the discredited model is one of its creators, Dr. Christopher Murray, who claimed that it's a little bit like forecasting the weather. We try to take into account all the data that is coming in from all the states, and so all of our numbers are going to be revised as we see progress faster or slower. But overall, we think that the general trend that we've seen since the beginning is a range between 40,000 to 150,000 deaths being where we'll fall out from the country come June. No. A weather forecast actually forecasts the weather. It doesn't change a forecast of rain to partly cloudy after it starts to rain. And a prediction of 40,000 to 150,000 deaths is like a weather forecast that predicts that tomorrow there will be anything from scattered showers to a monsoon. In this case, the fake prediction spread is between a typical flu season and a deadly pandemic on the order of the Spanish flu of 1917. Such a prediction could not be more dangerous for shaping public policy. Yet, as Fox News notes, even though the IHME model is garbage, The projections were used by the Trump administration in developing national guidelines to mitigate the outbreak. Now they are reportedly influencing White House thinking on how and when to reopen the country, as President Trump announced a blueprint for on Thursday. Dr. Birx attempted to explain away these fatal embarrassments to her science by claiming that the IHME model constantly changes its fake predictions because it is modeled on what America is doing. That's what's happening. She apparently thinks she can fool all of the people all of the time and that no one will notice that what she is really saying is that the model predicts what is already happening. Moreover, as I have stressed repeatedly, the model assumed from the beginning that Americans would mitigate the virus, whatever mitigation means. So the ever-lowering predicted death toll indicates only that none of its predictions with mitigation were reliable in the first place, and that eventually the predictions will simply predict the actual number of deaths attributed in any way to the Wuhan virus. But it's not only the IHME model which fed a baseless narrative that transformed a flu-like seasonal illness already declining as the weather warms into a veritable plague justifying the national lockdown. In fact, all of the predictive models were wrong, and they were all wrong in the same way. Wild exaggeration of the death toll from the Wuhan virus. As Alex Berenson has put it, in February, I was worried about the virus. By mid-March, I was more scared about the economy. But now I'm starting to get genuinely nervous. This isn't complicated. The models don't work. The hospitals are empty. Why are we still talking about indefinite lockdowns? I will tell you why, dear reader. What has really been going on all along is that the Democrats in lab coats have allied with Democrats in politics in an effort to burn down the country so that Trump will have nothing to take credit for, which will ensure the election as president of a senile old political hack who cannot even express a coherent thought, and the advent of a post-COVID world of massively enhanced state power and institutionalized. Yes. I will mention that the Imperial College London model, which is the work of Professor Neil Ferguson, is a black box. That is to say, we don't know what's in it, and he is not letting us know. This apparently thousands of lines of undocumented C code written 13 years ago has resulted in nothing less than a tyrannical dictatorship in Great Britain. Now, if you think I'm exaggerating, I'm going to read from a piece from the Off Guardian today. The daily COVID-19 deaths reports issued by the UK government are generally misleading and being so misrepresented by the media that they amount to little more than a lie. Each day, the UK's Department of Health and Social Care releases a report titled Daily Number of COVID-19 Associated UK Deaths in Hospital. The media then report these numbers as the daily death toll, presenting the total as if all these people, A, died of COVID-19, B, died in the preceding 24 hours, neither of which is true. Point A, we've already covered in great detail. The UK government, like many other national governments, makes no effort whatsoever to distinguish between those who died of the coronavirus and those who died with the coronavirus. Therefore, of the daily COVID-19 deaths, an unknown number may have died of something else. This is not new information. Point B is not as widely known. The reported daily death toll is not a list of those who died that day. Essentially, the NHS's daily mortality reports, which are supposed to cover COVID-19 deaths over the previous 24 hours, will regularly and apparently randomly include data from many other days going back 6 weeks or more. To illustrate this, let's look at one day in detail, April the 10th. The DHSC report released that day states that 980 people died of COVID-19. This was covered in the press as the UK's deadliest COVID-19 day. The Telegraph's headline announced UK death toll jumps 980 in 24 hours and biggest rise yet. Yet, the Daily Mail reported Britain records Europe's highest single-day death toll, number of victims jumps by 980. Sky News went with 980 tops Spain and Italy's highest daily number of deaths, which were 961 and 919 respectively. But at the time the report was released, the previous 24 hours had seen just 117 COVID-19 related deaths, according to NHS England, with a further possible 90 coming from Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, for a maximum possible total of 204. The other 776 people included in the report had died at seemingly random points between March 5th and April 8th. The reported 980 deaths in one day were, in reality, spread over 5 weeks. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is not any kind of theory. It's a fact, openly admitted in the official numbers. It's not even an isolated incident. The same is true of all the daily COVID-19 death reports. Who were the 980 added to the COVID death figures on April the 10th? Why was this apparently random sample of people whose deaths were many weeks apart selected for inclusion as daily deaths on the same day? We don't know. No explanation is given, no rationale supplied. What we do know is that, despite what the government graphs claim, they didn't all die on the same day. We know that when the media reported that they did all die on the same day, they were essentially lying. And we know these lies are being repeated by police officers to scare people into staying out of their own front gardens. So, yes, Peter Hitchens writes, new data showing actual deaths peaked on April the 8th, which also suggests the shutdown probably not responsible for declining death rate, as it doesn't fit with the incubation period. But apparently none of this makes any difference. Let's see, NBC News in New York reports up to 2.7 million in New York may have been infected, antibody study finds. Well, how about that? If 2.7 million in New York have been infected, then it turns out that the death rate of COVID-19 is nowhere near as high as we have been told. Preliminary results from New York's first coronavirus antibody study show nearly 14% tested positive, meaning they had the virus at some point and recovered, Governor Andrew Cuomo said Thursday. That equates to 2.7 million infections statewide, more than 10 times the state's confirmed cases. The study, part of Cuomo's aggressive antibody testing launched earlier this week, is based on 3,000 random samples from 40 locations in 19 counties. While the preliminary data suggests much more widespread infection, it means New York's mortality rate is much lower than previously thought. As of Thursday, nearly 16,000 people in New York have died of virus-related complications. With 260,000 plus confirmed cases, the mortality rate would be as high as 6%. With 2.7 million cases, it would be around 0.5%, much lower, though still much higher than the seasonal flu. Now, keep in mind, you get this 0.5% death rate when all of these deaths so many of them are being faked. That's simple. This is not a conspiracy theory. Oh, last week we're going to add another 3,800. We're just going to decide, oh no, these people died of COVID. They weren't tested, and in many cases they didn't even have symptoms, but we want to jack the rate up. Governor Cuomo was quick to caution that the death toll was higher than the state's own official report. It counts deaths in hospitals and nursing homes, but not at-home deaths or other probable cases. In other words, the mortality rate is still hard to determine properly. So you see, they're just going to lie. They are simply just going to lie. Oh, yeah, okay. The number is this. And even with juking the stats, the number is this, but no, it was much, much, much higher. And this justifies a totalitarian dictatorship. This is from Breitbart. A report released Wednesday by the Centers for Disease Control revealed that 66% of homeless people in a San Francisco shelter tested positive for coronavirus, renewing concerns about indoor housing during the pandemic. The Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report investigated 19 homeless shelters nationwide, including 15 in Seattle, 1 in Boston, 2 in Atlanta, and 1 each in Boston and San Francisco. Overall, the average prevalence of coronavirus among residents was 25%, and the average prevalence among staff was 11% and 16% in San Francisco. San Francisco's result was particularly striking, not only because it was so large, but because the overall infection rate in the area was low. So, yes, apparently COVID-19 is very efficient at infecting people, not so efficient in killing them unless they are old, really old, and have several other conditions that physicians call comorbidities. Yes, the question. There's a question put to Alex Berenson. They can't ignore all the antibody testing across the country showing virtually the same thing. It's been way more spread than previously understood. And Berenson responds, no, apparently they can ignore it. Or worse, spin it as bad news. SARS-CoV-2 is so awful that so many people who get it don't even know it. What a terrible illness. Now, the American epicenter of the epidemic was in New York City, and that is significant. The Z-Man had a post yesterday called Cosmopolitan, Provincials. He says, because the center was New York City, the home of the media centers, it is the only thing worth discussing. The most provincial people on earth live in New York City, and media people are some of the dumbest, making for the perfect storm. For example, the people protesting the crackdown are people with a real stake in society, as in a job and bills to pay. They are not motivated by esoteric debates about political philosophy. They don't have a walk-in closet full of moral signifiers that they use to display their membership in narrow identity groups. They just try to live their lives the best they can under the conditions set for them. The conditions are becoming untenable now, so they are making as much noise as they can about it. The typical cosmopolitan looks at these protests and just assumes the people doing them are ignorant and confused. Don't they know how dangerous it is out there? The cosmopolitans incredulously demand. The fact is, the protesters know exactly how dangerous it is out there, i.e., not very dangerous at all, and they are willing to bet on their own judgment about it. The cosmos, on the other hand, knows only what is told to them by the mass media. They let the system decide these things for them. This is one of the things that does not always turn up when times are easy. If you live in or around an urban center, you grow used to being bossed around. You get used to depending on the system. The Manhattan media employee rides subways, walks past cops, and relies on a vast system to supply her with food. She thinks she is tech savvy because she has a lot of cool apps on her iPhone. In reality, she is like an oxpecker living on the rhinovirus of the cosmopolitan system. In contrast, the guy living in a distant suburb or flyover country spends most of his time away from the state. He depends on the supply chain, like everyone else, to put stuff in the stores, but he works in the supply chain. He has some idea how the stuff magically appears on the shelves. He drives his own car to those stores and has to rely on himself to get it repaired when necessary. His days are not filled with self-actualizing, but rather the mundane tasks of living. These are the people that Major Tom, the professor at the Naval War College, he does not like these flyover people. They're dumb, dumb, dumb people. How do we know that they're dumb? Well, they voted for Trump. So QED. There's a binary division in America that I don't know how long this is sustainable. That just as Z-Man points out, that the people who are actually responsible for maintaining the supply chain are the very people who are hated by the beneficiary of the supply chain. So let's have a look at the chat, see what's going on. The first comment, this will be KMG's greatest show, by Lorem Ipsum. There's some synchronicity there. This expression Lorem Ipsum, which refers to Latin, which is used to fill space on pages as a placeholder. I heard a joke about this last night from one of the two Canadians who makes regular appearances on Red Letter Media. Okay, I hope your dad is doing okay. I don't know. Again, I guess I'll be talking about ventilators soon. Ventilators kill people. they're very efficient at killing people. But one of the great myths of this panic is that no, need more ventilators. Why hasn't Trump magically produced more ventilators? And now we're finding out that ventilators are very bad for people indeed. Dawn from Beyond says, I should be out dashing, but the dumb app is down again nationwide for over 3 hours so far. DoorDash makes huge profits, yet the app crashes at least weekly. Yes. Metal Mike says, if modeling is being used against Trump, what about the modeling in other countries? Well, that is an interesting question. What's going on in Britain is absolutely heartbreaking to me. That, oh, yeah, it's a dictatorship now, and it's going to last, oh, maybe forever. Well, based on what? Based on faked numbers, as I explained earlier. Lecomte de Boreas says, I hope your father will have a quick recovery. Well, yes, so do I, but that hardly seems likely, considering his age and his comorbidities. YT says, I'm beginning to wonder if they actually plan to let us out. Also, I'm hearing from people who have contacts in local politics that New York City plans to start reopening only in June and fully open in winter. But what if the virus comes back? What if there's a spike? What if New York City decides to count every single death as a COVID-19 death? And I think they're quite capable of this, you know, because we find out that more and more people have been exposed to the disease. So, you know, we can blame every death on COVID-19. Chogankin 666 says Mind AIDS 2020. I quite like that, actually. William Hicks says, using the math of the Santa Clara study, New York City should be at or near herd immunity. New cases should fall off a great deal in the next week or two. Yako Raipala says, I think I have the coronavirus now. This week I've had a loss of taste, sore throat, and fever. It seems to have mostly gone now, so no big deal at all. The Don says, just found your new show, KMG, great format and great to see you back streaming. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And YT says, yeah, I don't think it matters at what age your parent dies or how old you are. It's always impactful. Well, yeah, no question about that. Okay, so what is up next? Let's look at the financial information. Mike Pence, who's the Vice President of the United States, says 16 states have released plans to lift coronavirus restrictions. House passes $484 billion bill to boost small businesses and hospitals. An unemployment rate of 23%. The real jobless picture is coming together. Yes, what the jobless claims more millions of people. Yeah, let's move on from that. Oh, yes. People are going to die because of COVID-19, because of the disease, but they're also going to die because the rest of the healthcare system has been wrecked because of it. It's a story from Joel Rubin of the LA Times. Where are the strokes and the heart attacks? Doctors worry as patients avoid ERs. California hospital emergency departments are strangely quiet places these days. Before the coronavirus hit, tens of thousands of people across the state sought emergency help every day. But in the weeks since the virus began its spread throughout the U.S., those numbers have plummeted by a third to a half, according to physicians overseeing emergency departments and hospitals across LA County and elsewhere in California. The steep decline comes amid drastic measures hospitals have put in place to prepare for what health officials fear could be a wave of patients infected by the coronavirus like the ones that have overwhelmed hospitals in New York City and elsewhere. It seems likely that California, like Washington, like British Columbia, was actually hit by the coronavirus late last year. Where are the strokes and where are the heart attacks? Where are the diabetics having complications, said Larry Stock, an emergency physician at Antelope Valley Hospital. These cases didn't just vaporize with the virus. I worry people are suffering at home because they're afraid our emergency rooms are radioactive. Well, we know that for people who have strokes, the sooner these people are treated, the better their long-term condition will be. And clearly that is not the case. We're going to have a great many people dying of strokes and heart attacks who wouldn't have otherwise have died. We're going to have a great many people dying of cancer because they are not being treated, because cancer operations are not being done. But, you know, and I have to be careful here because apparently disagreeing with the WHO is not good for staying on this stream. So I've got to be careful. But the experts are telling us that any disagreement is a conspiracy theory. This is a piece from Anatoly Gruzd and Philip Mai in National Newswatch. Conspiracy theorists are falsely claiming that the coronavirus pandemic is an elaborate hoax. You see what's going on here? There are people who are claiming that the reaction to COVID-19 is misguided and counterproductive. But let's just go to the wildest claims and lump everybody together. The two right in the midst of a global pandemic, conspiracy theorists have found yet another way to spread dangerous disinformation and misinformation. Once again, disinformation and misinformation means claims and opinions that stand outside the dominant narrative. So they're spreading this misinformation about COVID-19, sowing seeds of doubt about its severity and denying the very existence of the pandemic. Well, the numbers have come in about its severity, and it is nowhere near as deadly as we were told, which was the excuse for the imposition of totalitarian measures. Since March 28th, conspiracy theorists, coronavirus deniers, like Holocaust deniers, have been using the hashtag #FilmYourHospital to encourage people to visit local hospitals to take pictures and videos to prove that the COVID-19 pandemic is an elaborate hoax. The premise for this conspiracy theory rests on the baseless assumption that if hospital parking lots and waiting rooms are empty, then the pandemic must not be real or not as severe as reported by health authorities in the media. Do you remember that LA Times story that I just read, where you have these doctors worrying that people, suffering heart attacks, strokes, diabetics, or whatever, are not coming to the hospital? But here we have two experts on the media from Ryerson University saying, just ignore that. Just ignore the evidence of your eyes. They write, of course, there's a simple explanation for why some hospital parking lots and waiting rooms might have been empty. As part of pandemic planning, many hospitals have banned visitors and doctors have had to postpone or cancel elective and non-urgent procedures. Yes, I think that a operation to remove a cancerous tumor, certainly to the patient, this seems like an urgent procedure. To free up medical staff and resources. This is in keeping with expert advice from the Centers for Disease Control and other health authorities. The empty hospital conspiracy theory, it's not a conspiracy theory, it's a fact, joins a parade of false, unproven, and misleading claims about the virus that have been making the rounds on social media, including allegation that 5G wireless technology somehow plays a role in the spread of COVID-19 virus, or consuming silver particles or drinking water with lemon prevents or cures you of the virus. None of these are true. Well, as I recently found out, and I've mentioned before, the whole point of the 5G, apparently they must have transmitters on every street corner, is to further enable the Internet of Things, and the Internet of Things is wicked. It is quite wicked that everything in our house is going to be spying on us. Yes, I want my refrigerator to know everything about me, to record all my conversations, and to send them to a database. At the Ryerson University Social Media Lab, some of our research investigates how misinformation propagates across different social media platforms. One of the steps when examining trending topics on social media is to look for signs of social bots. Yes, everyone who disagrees with me is a bot, probably a Russian bot. Social media accounts designed to act on Twitter and other platforms with some level of autonomy and coordinated, inauthentic behavior that may include coordinated activities that attempt to artificially manipulate conversations to make them appear more popular than they are. Yes. Let's see. They conclude, in normal times, outlandish conspiracies like this might make us shake our heads, but as COVID-19 cases continue to stalk the hallways of nursing homes in Canada and fill beds in New York hospitals, yeah, where they got, what, a 20% capacity there? That's not what I call filling beds. It is harder to ignore such upsetting conspiracies from the dark recesses of the internet. The demonization is what we're talking about here. The rise of this conspiracy from a single tweet, oh, come off it, reminds us that while the spread of misinformation can be mitigated, there's that word mitigation again, by fact-checking and directing people to credible sources of information from public health agencies like the World Health Organization, that august institution. False and misleading claims that are driven by politics and supported by strong convictions and not science are much harder to root out. Mitigation, yeah, it turns out that mitigation means totalitarianism. So I guess if we're going to mitigate so-called false claims, well, that would mean censorship. Would it not? All right. Twitter to block virus 5G conspiracy theory tweets. Yes, I wonder, and they say that this leads to violence. You know, I'm reminded that the Unabomber was a great fan of Al Gore's book, Earth in the Balance. Now, some people on the right made the claim that Al Gore was somehow responsible for the murders and maimings committed by the Unabomber. No, I'm sorry, Al Gore is not responsible for any of that thing. One is not responsible for the uses that are made of one's statements. It's the statements themselves that need to be looked at. William Briggs, who calls himself the statistician to the stars, writes today, some coronavirus predictions are coming true. The CDC correctly predicts second wave. And this is from the director, I believe his name is Robert Redfield. There is a possibility that the assault of the virus on our nation next winter will actually be even more difficult than the one we just went through. Redfield said in an interview with Washington Post. And when I've said this to others, they kind of put their head back. They don't understand what I mean. Assault, as in a strategically planned military attack? Ha ha, what a conspiracy theorist Redfield is. Back in the real world, we're going to have the flu epidemic and the coronavirus epidemic at the same time. Briggs comments, having two simultaneous respiratory outbreaks would put unimaginable strain on the healthcare system, according to Redfield. The first wave of COVID-19, the disease caused by the coronavirus, has already killed more than 42,000 people across the country. It has overwhelmed hospitals and revealed gaping shortages in test kits, ventilators, and protective equipment for healthcare workers. I wonder if Redfield remembers we had a flu epidemic and a coronavirus epidemic at the same time, way back in April of 2020, and that hospitals, in spite of forecasts that said otherwise, did just fine. That's ancient history, so we can forgive him for forgetting. Here's the real meat. Quote, in a wide-ranging interview, Redfield said federal and state officials need to use the coming months to prepare for what lies ahead. As stay-at-home orders are lifted, officials need to stress the continued importance of social distancing. They also need to massively scale up their ability to identify the infected through testing and find everyone they interact with through contact tracing. Doing so now prevents new cases from becoming larger outbreaks, unquote. This forecast has no chance of failing. The coronavirus known as COVID-19 will ever be with us. Even the U.S. government cannot eliminate it. It will be here again in the fall. To predict it will kill and kill again is the easiest, safest disease prediction ever made. So what then? I've asked the question a dozen times, and I have not yet heard from nervous readers. Should we lock down each fall for 3 to 4 months? If lockdowns work, which is dogma, an unquestionable truth, then you have to justify not locking down this coming fall and every fall. Contact tracing, are they kidding us? This is such a, again, I just keep thinking, have I died and gone to hell, or have I gone insane? Contact tracing would be literally impossible. possible. But apparently, we got to have contact tracing before the lockdown is lifted, which means that it's never going to be lifted. The rate of coronavirus infections in LA up to 55 times higher than confirmed cases. After adjusting for statistical margin of error, that means anywhere from 221,000 to 442 local adults in Los Angeles have been infected by the coronavirus. That number is 28 to 55 times higher than the 7,994 confirmed COVID-19 cases in LA at the time the study was conducted earlier this month. I bet is higher still given the limitations of the study, but that's neither here nor there. Like I said in the weekly update, the act of testing will and is being used to passively juice numbers to give the impression the virus is spreading when it's already here. Excess mortality data suggests as many as 25,000 uncounted coronavirus deaths. To come up with this estimate, the Times looked at recent mortality data of 11 countries. More people had recently died in these countries than in previous years, but official COVID-19 death tolls only made up a small chunk of the increase. Spain saw 7,300 more deaths than usual between March 9th and April 5th, while New York City had its typical death rate nearly quadruple in a similar time mortality numbers show. These excess deaths added up to 25,000 among those 11 countries. Recall that flu deaths are never counted, but estimated using statistical models to identify excess deaths. Recall, too, that it didn't seem they were assigning flu deaths as coronavirus deaths because of the way the flu deaths pictures looked, but they could. Now it looks like they want to remove deaths assigned to flu and reassign them to coronavirus, which is a good way to get the numbers higher to match predictions. If a man dies and he has both flu and coronavirus, what should be his cause of death? Add heart disease. Now, what? Coronavirus kills more Americans in 1 month than the flu kills in 1 year. Briggs comments, this from National Review. It's also asinine. Flu estimates are somewhere between the low 30,000 to low 90,000 dead per year. Corona-chan will come in somewhere about this range. Flu also kills over a couple of months, just like coronavirus. The fix is in. Well, I guess a very prominent denier, if that's the word we're going to use, would be Tucker Carlson. During his opening monologue yesterday, Carlson outlined how the Wuhan virus has led to an authoritarian police state with any real basis in science. It's easier to be fooled than to convince people they have been fooled. Mark Twain said that. Now, he talks about supermarkets. What Carlson alludes to, though he didn't specifically connect the dot, is the reality of how some sectors of the U.S. economy have continued without issue. That factual reality doesn't reconcile with the doomsday claims. No other business segment within the economy is as exposed to the population as the retail food business, and yet supermarkets operated without issue. There are a few high-traffic businesses more densely populated than grocery stores. In fact, within the U.S. economy, retail supermarkets have the highest foot traffic of any business sector in the entire economy. That's an empirical fact. And the coronavirus impact increased that foot traffic by an average of 40%. Now stop and think about this logically and apply a large dose of common sense. Think about human-to-human interface. First, with approximately 90% of the total U.S. population penetrating through grocery outlets, and with 100% of that massive number of consumers going through checkout lines, if the COVID-19 viral strain was as significant as claimed by the worst-case data, then supermarket cashiers would have been the highest exposed profession of U.S. workers in the entire nation. There wouldn't even be a close second place. Consider that metric. And considering the overall population penetration and density within the business operation, there has not been an employee-based business disruption due to the coronavirus. Put another way, the coronavirus has not stopped the function of the highest human interface occupation in the entire U.S. economy. Secondly, think about the businesses that are closed. Perhaps think about your job that might have been shut down. Now frame your risk based on the supermarket example as the highest human interface and highest population penetration in any business field. If the number one at-risk industry has operated essentially without disruption and with almost zero substantive mitigation while carrying the largest population exposure rate, then all other less exposed business operations would have significantly less operational risk. Why would anyone be concerned about opening their business? Conspiracy theories. There's a fellow called Robert Gore who has a blog called Straight Line Logic, and he is calling this coronacide, and there's an illustration of a circular firing squad. And it begins with a quotation from a previous column: as the totalitarian horror unfolds before our eyes, only the willfully blind will ignore it. Only those who refuse to think will fail to grasp its implications. Only the irretrievably corrupt will embrace it. Viruses typically show exponential growth early on, but that cannot continue, or essentially the virus will take over the entire planet. The experts offered projections based on exponential growth, even as their own statistics showed that growth curves were becoming non-exponential. It reminds me, I passed by a store called The Running Room, equipment for people who like to run, and there was a little sign outside the store, which is closed. It says, "It takes a village to flatten the curve." Isn't that sweet? Only the curve has been flattened, and apparently that makes no difference. Now, Robert Gore is arguing that this was done deliberately. It's very odd when one looks at it, because, okay, so we get news from China, and the Chinese government says nothing to worry about. This disease can't even be communicated from person to person. And the WHO pushes that line. And the WHO adds that the real killer disease is xenophobia, with its attendant stigmatization. And then they turn on a dime. And suddenly, this is a threat to humanity itself. Gore writes, "The impending financial and economic collapse as the debt and derivative daisy chains break is both obvious and inevitable. There will be no quick bounce back when we're paroled from our pandemic prisons. The world needs all the production it can get simply to pay debt service, but the global production shutdown and piles of new debt put us that much deeper in the hole. The ruling caste knows that debt and bailouts of parasitic but politically connected individuals and corporations make the collapse that much worse, but that's part of the plan. In the ruling caste's perfect world, there are two castes, theirs and everyone else. Call it the untouchables, or better yet, the deplorables, impoverished, dependent, and subservient. A thriving independent middle class, one of capitalism's greatest creations, simply has no right to exist. It doesn't need a ruling caste, reason enough to hate it, and must be eliminated. The global depression will eliminate it, as well as many of its former members. That a slave society might not be much fun for the masters has seemingly not entered into ruling caste calculations." Yeah, as I said earlier, apparently Americans and Canadians, they don't need jobs. They just need a $1,200 check every month. Yeah, that's $14,400 a year. That's not going to go very far. So, if this keeps going, well, living standards are simply going to collapse. Maybe we can all live in barracks. I understand that that has become very fashionable. Maybe that's the future. Barracks living. Oh, okay. This is an interesting story. Trump derangement syndrome. Democrats in Detroit plan to censure Democratic Michigan State Representative Karen Whitsett, who is a black woman, who credited President Donald Trump with saving her life after she experienced a severe case of the coronavirus. This is from the Daily Caller. Whitsett used hydroxychloroquine to treat her illness. The drug normally used to treat malaria patients has been touted by Trump as an effective treatment for the coronavirus. Whitsett later visited the White House and has repeatedly offered praise for the president. "It has a lot to do with the president bringing it up," she said. "He is the only person who has the power to make it a priority." Now, the 13th Congressional District Democratic Party organization is seeking to censure the lawmaker. "At the end of the day, we have political systems," said Jonathan Kinloch, chairman of the organization. "We have political parties, and political parties exist for a reason." Yeah. So apparently bipartisanship. You used to hear a lot about bipartisanship, that, partisanship was bad. You still hear this from the same people who insist that if you don't hate Donald Trump with the heat of 1,000 suns, as they used to say, then you are a bad person and must be canceled. Stephen Moore, a member of Trump's economic task force, I know of this man going way back. He's kind of a nutter, more capitalism, more free market. It's going to solve every problem, and bigger is better, bigger, bigger, bigger. According to The Week, one of President Trump's economic advisors has an admittedly crazy idea for how to reopen the country amid the coronavirus pandemic. Stephen Moore spoke to the New York Times about restarting the U.S. economy, saying that he's been advising the president about how we really have to get things opened as soon as May 1st, but how are states to send people back to work in a safe way that doesn't endanger public health. Moore offered a bit of an out-of-the-box suggestion. I was thinking this morning, and this is just kind of a thought experiment because I was thinking about this, why don't we just put everybody in a space outfit or something like that? No, seriously. The Times noted to Miller that, well, we'd have to make the space outfits, a fact he acknowledged while continuing to spitball. I mean, just thinking out loud, and maybe this is a crazy idea, but instead of just locking down the economy, putting everybody in a kind of, you're right, you have to make 200 million of these, but it wouldn't have cost $3 trillion to do that. Is that the future? Everyone wearing space suits? Let's cut down that human contact to zero. From the Associated Press, for weeks, the Trump administration played up the dangers of the coronavirus as it sought to persuade Americans to disrupt their lives and stay home. Now, Trump aims for a swift nationwide reopening. He faces a new challenge, convincing people it's safe to come out and resume their normal lives. Well, Trump did take issue with Governor Kemp of Georgia, suggesting that he was moving too quickly. It's a defining question for a cloistered nation and a political imperative for Trump, whose re-election likely rides on the pace of an economic rebound. Can the country move beyond a crippling fear of the virus and return to some modified version of its old routines, doing what's possible to mitigate the risk of COVID-19, but acknowledging it may be a fact of life for years to come? Yeah, there's a planted axiom in this story is that everyone is terrified of the coronavirus. I don't think that it's anywhere close to being true, but that is the media line. And people who are not, like protesters, they're COVIDiots. They're very bad people. The mayor of Las Vegas, Carolyn Goodman, has suggested that Las Vegas be kind of a test case. Again, according to AP, Nevada officials condemned comments Wednesday by Las Vegas Mayor Carolyn Goodman after she called for casinos and other non-essential businesses to open and suggested the city could serve as a test case to measure the impact during the coronavirus pandemic. One local official called her comments reckless and dangerous, and another described them as an embarrassment. Goodman, during a 25-minute interview with Anderson Cooper on CNN, said she wants everything back open, including casinos, restaurants, and small businesses, and a return of conventions. I offered to be a control group, and I was told by our statistician, you can't do that because people from all parts of southern Nevada come in to work in the city. We would love to be that placebo side so you have something to measure against. Needless to say, this woman was rubbished on social media. I don't know, maybe she has something. I mean, the business of, I don't like organized gambling. I've never been to Las Vegas and have no desire to be there, but the business of Las Vegas is gambling. Oh, yes, people go to the shows and such like, but they go to the shows, after they've gone gambling and before they go gambling again. The Love Gov, Andrew Cuomo, you want to go back to work? Get a job as an essential worker. Oh, it's that easy. Maybe you could get a job like his. Or, maybe you could be in the state assembly of New York, or maybe you could, you could work for New York City, right? These government people, they haven't been laid off, have they? Because apparently they're all essential. Even if they're not, showing up at the parliaments, they're still essential. It would be irresponsible to demand that they actually, show up at the House of Commons, House of Representatives, Senate, or whatever. It's just too dangerous, too dangerous. Cuomo debated with a reporter Wednesday about protesters in New York upset about losing their jobs. You want to go to work? Go take a job as an essential worker. Do it tomorrow. When was the last time that Andrew Cuomo ever looked for a job? When Andrew Cuomo leaves office, there will be a path beaten to his door, perhaps virtually, of all of these offers in TV, to be on boards of directors, and such like. Perhaps Andrew Cuomo has forgotten that is not what it is like for ordinary people. I remember being quite taken years ago, reading a story about Peter Lougheed, who was Premier of Alberta for, 13, 14 years or whatever. And he admitted that he got so far into the bubble that when he left office, he realized that he'd forgotten to do certain things, like how to book a rental car, how to reserve space on an airplane or a hotel, all of that sort of stuff, because for over a decade, he'd had people whose jobs were to do that sort of thing. Cuomo continued, there are people hiring. You can get a job as an essential worker. So now you can go to work, and now you're an essential worker, and now you won't kill anyone. Yeah, these people who run the non-essential businesses, they want death. They want mass death. The reporter said some of the protesters she spoke to were suffering the loss of their incomes for their families. These are regular people that aren't getting a paycheck, some of them not getting their unemployment check. Cuomo asserted that unemployment was not worse than spreading the coronavirus, which he argued meant death. Well, the figures from New York State indicate that it doesn't really mean that much death. 0.5% at the maximum, that's even including the juiced numbers. Bloomberg reports gulf widens between states over when to end a virus lockdown. Alex Berenson had a poll on his Twitter feed asking readers whether they were planning to leave their lockdown states to move to states that hadn't been locked down, and about 25% said that they actually do. Cuomo again said, how can the cure be worse than the illness if the illness is potential death? Driving a car is potential death, and tens of thousands of Americans die every year in car accidents. Why isn't that logic applied to private ownership of automobiles? I mean, if it saves just one life, and we're talking about, around 40,000 in the United States every year, lives could be saved if automobiles were banned. Or just think of how many lives could be saved if the driving age was raised to 25, and that people over 65 were not allowed to drive, or speed limits were reduced from 70 to, 50 or 30 miles an hour. How about that? No, but apparently this COVID-19 is different than any other risk in human history. Oh, and in some good news, this is from the Washington Post. Constitutionalist sheriffs won't enforce coronavirus restrictions. In Snohomish County, Washington, Sheriff Adam Fortney is refusing to enforce the governor's stay-at-home order. He claims the order intrudes on our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. On April 22nd, he told constituents via Facebook post that along with other elected sheriffs around our state, the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office will not be enforcing an order preventing religious freedoms or constitutional rights. These Washington sheriffs are far from alone. They're a part of a nationwide group of sheriffs who feel beholden to no one but their voters. As they have on issues such as immigration and gun regulations, they will lead rebellions against higher levels of government, in this case, undermining public health efforts in the name of their interpretation of the U.S. Constitution. Freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, yet their interpretation of what are plain words. Oh, yes, and we're talking about the U.S. Constitution. The California Highway Patrol bans protests at California Capitol after rally against Governor Newsom's stay-at-home order. The Constitution has been suspended indefinitely. And anyone who would suggest that there's something sinister about this is obviously a conspiracy theorists. Permits are issued to provide safe environments for demonstrators to express their views, the CHP said in a statement. In this case, the permit for the convoy was issued with the understanding that the protest would be conducted in a manner consistent with the state's public health guidance. That is not what occurred, and CHP will take this experience into account when considering permits for this or any other group. Monday's protest, which mirrored others that have sprung up nationwide and have been dubbed Operation Gridlock, featured hundreds of people driving vehicles around the Capitol complex in downtown Sacramento, honking horns, and hundreds of others standing shoulder to shoulder, cheering them on as they expressed opposition to the governor's stay-at-home order. Well, California seems to, they're in this for the duration, but it doesn't really take all that many people to jam the machines. Oh, we've heard a lot about Karens lately. They are bad women, bad white women. But there seems to be some disagreement about which side the Karens are on in this lockdown, no lockdown dispute. Now, when I saw that Karens was trending on Twitter, I went and looked at a bunch of the tweets, and they were all about, oh, these bad people protesting the lockdown are Karens. My understanding of the usage of Karen is that it's referring to affluent white female liberals. And these are exactly the people who are cheering on the lockdown, are saying that it will last for however long it's going to last. Maybe it will last forever. There's a new normal, and anyone who disagrees with this is in favor of death. But from the U.S. Sun, incredible moment: nurse faces off with Arizona lockdown protesters after saving lives of coronavirus patients. This is a contentious statement. After saving lives of coronavirus patients, maybe they were saving lives, maybe they weren't. If they were let's put everyone on a ventilator, then they're clearly not saving lives. But there's various pictures of these officious women wearing masks and having it out with people who are protesting. Their arms crossed, mask on their face. I am a medical expert. How dare you disagree with me? Photographs captured Colorado nurses standing in front of a number of vehicles, staring back at the drivers with their arms crossed, refusing to move under a cacophony of horns and worker to move out of the way, but he remained unmoved, opting simply to look away. And there is a picture of a Hispanic man wearing a backwards baseball cap. He's heavily tattooed, and he's wearing a Chicago Bulls jersey, and he is remonstrating with a white male nurse wearing orange sunglasses. Again, I don't think that this is going to end well. Let's go back to the chat, see what's going on there. Yeah, okay. Starvation because no money is death, MFR. Choking King 666, they're never this cautious when it comes to war. Cogitate upon that. Yes, I forgot to mention that conspiracy theories. Here's a conspiracy theory for you, that the governments of the United States and Britain and other countries made up a story about a dictator in the Middle East having weapons of mass destruction, which could kill tens of thousands of people within minutes. And, we have to invade and occupy this country because of these deadly weapons of mass destruction. And guess what? There were no weapons of mass destruction. How about that, eh? There's a complaint about the light. I suppose it could be that it's sunny today. Okay. Yeah, that's worse. Okay, how about this at level 1? Is that better? Chogo King 666, shouldn't that nurse be twerking? Actually, these were, all of the nurses in the pictures were actually thin, good looking, actually. Walrus Libertarian says, Chad, herd immunity versus virgin social isolation. Actually, Azer Vanier, the quote is not from Bismarck, it is from the British journalist Claude Coburn, who said, never believe anything until it has been officially denied. Don from Beyond says, we all know the term conspiracy theorist was invented by the CIA in order to demonize those who dared ask inconvenient questions re the JFK assassination. You know, another thing that Claude Coburn pointed out, that people often speak as if, you know, facts, the truth, could be gathered like pebbles on a beach. And it is not like that. If you read anything about history, if you read anything about anything that's happened, people who were there say wildly different things. My favorite example of this from popular culture is the Blue Oyster Cult song "Don't Fear the Reaper," which was a moderate hit. I think it reached number 12 in 1976, and then it was later immortalized by a Saturday Night Live sketch with Christopher Walken. There are 3 different people who claim to have played the cowbell on that song. So it's not as if, it's a fact that so-and-so did this. No, because it can't be determined, and much of life is like that. Chad Chadson, our moderator, says, didn't Sweden already reach herd immunity? Well, I'm going to get to Sweden in just a minute. Okay. So, yes, conspiracy theories, totalitarianism. That is dangerous, dangerous talk from CNET. Pandemic drone test flights are monitoring social distancing. A series of pandemic drones is taking part in a test flight in the COVID-19 hotspot in Connecticut with the goal of monitoring social distancing efforts and detecting the virus's symptoms. Drone manufacturer Dragonfly, and dragon is spelled D-R-A-G, is working with the police department in Westport, Connecticut to test the drones. Located in Fairfield County, adjacent to New York City, Westport was the first town in the state to report several coronavirus infections. The drones include specialized sensor and computer vision systems that can display a person's temperature, heart and respiratory rates, as well as detect people sneezing or coughing in a crowd, the release said. The technology can accurately detect infectious conditions from 190 feet away, as well as measure social distancing efforts. Here's a question you might want to ask yourself. There were various measures proposed in the 1980s to combat the spread of the AIDS epidemic. And quarantine was suggested, mandatory reporting and contact tracing was suggested. They were all shot down. They were all shot down. And why is that? Because it turned out that homosexuals are a particularly powerful political group, something that was not really understood until that time. But now we're going to surrender all of our privacy, and the government is going to know what our body temperature is whenever we go outside. And of course, that is in no way an overreaction. The new normal, Leon Cooperman says the coronavirus crisis will change capitalism forever and taxes have to go up. Cooperman is described as a billionaire investor, and he said this on CNBC's Squawk Box. Things like carried interest, capital gains tax, the ability to roll over real estate sales tax-free, all that stuff is going to have to be eliminated. Cooperman has previously said that he supported higher tax rates, but strongly opposed the idea of a wealth tax, such as that proposed by Elizabeth Warren. When the government is called upon to protect you on the downside, they have every right to regulate you on the upside. So capitalism has changed. Quickly, if Biden wins, slowly, if Trump wins, taxes have to go up. We'll see about that. We'll see about that. The rich people have done pretty well out of this panic. From Fast Company, though the coronavirus itself may not discriminate in terms of who can be infected, the COVID-19 pandemic is far from a great equalizer. In the same month that 22 million Americans lost their job, the American billionaire class's total wealth increased about 10%, or $282 billion more than it was at the beginning of March. They now have a combined net worth of $3.3 trillion. The initial stock market crash may have dented some net worths at first, for instance, that of Jeff Bezos, which dropped down to a mere $105 billion on March the 12th, but his riches have rebounded. As of April 15th, his net worth has increased by $25 billion. Eric Yuan, founder and CEO of Zoom, was one of the few to see an increase in net worth even as the markets crashed, and now he's up $2.6 billion. These pandemic profiteers, as the new report from the Institute for Policy Studies, a progressive think tank, calls them, is just one piece of the wealth inequality puzzle in America. In the background is the fact that since 1980, the taxes paid by billionaires, measured as a percentage of their wealth, dropped 79%. So Leon Cooperman says that capitalism is going to be changed. Well, in a situation where ordinary people are being reduced to peonage, while the billionaires are doing even better, this has dangerous political consequences. I mean, they must realize this, right? I mean, they would have to realize it. So let's talk about Britain, which England, of course, is a part of. Today is St. George's Day, and St. George is, associated with liberty, but it turns out that liberty is surplus to requirements. David Allen Green writes, yesterday, slipped out without foreign announcement was a significant extension in England of the coronavirus regulations. The extension was by the way of a statutory instrument. The substance of the extension is an amendment to Regulation 6 of the coronavirus regulations. Before this amendment, the key criminal offense under Regulation 6 would be committed when a person left the place where they were living without reasonable excuse. That had the merit of legal certainty, but it also created a gap. What would happen if a person, having had a reasonable excuse to leave the place where they were living, then ceased to have a reasonable excuse? Under the initial regulations, that would still give rise to a power for an officer to make a reasonable direction that such a person return to where they live, and it would be a criminal offense to breach that direction. But it would not be a criminal offense in itself to be out without a reasonable excuse, as long as a person had one when they left the place where they were living, as criminal offenses are interpreted strictly. In practice, this made the evidential burden for the offense difficult, as how could the prosecution show that a person already outside did not leave the place where they were living without a reasonable excuse? The new amendment deals with this by simply adding "or be outside of" to the offense, which now reads, during the emergency period, no person may leave or be outside of the place where they are living without reasonable excuse. One response to this amendment is fair enough, a technical gap is filled. But there are two concerns with this, one formal and one constitutional. The formal problem is that the Home Office officials and lawyers have been rather naughty. This is an extension of the law, but they are pretending it is a clarification, and they are doing that for a naughty reason. It is not a clarification, as it means that a person can now be committing a criminal offense who beforehand would not be committing offense. Yes. So once again, as with numbers, they are lying about what they're doing with the law. From Breitbart, today, the coronavirus continued to ravish the U.S. economy last week, with 4.4 million Americans filing first-time unemployment claims, the Labor Department reported today. Economists had forecast 4.25 million new claims The previous week's claims figures was revised down 2,000 to 5.5 million. Continuing claims of those made after initial week of benefits rose to 16 million. Continuing claims, however, were reported with a 1-week lag. The total number of Americans who have lost jobs since claims spiked 5 weeks ago because of coronavirus shutdowns rose to about 26.4 million, enough to erase all the job gains since the economy began to recover after the financial crisis. How many of those jobs are going to come back? Andrew Cuomo, back to the love gov again. This is again from Breitbart. He fired back at Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell during his press briefing on Thursday, angry that he suggested states such as New York declare bankruptcy in the wake of the coronavirus crisis. Cuomo criticized McConnell as the self-proclaimed Grim Reaper for suggesting that Democrat states declare bankruptcy rather than get bailout funds from Congress. The New York governor criticized McConnell's vicious description of funds for the states as blue state bailouts. How ugly a thought, Cuomo said. Just think of what he's saying. This is the same man who said, oh, you want a job? Well, just get an essential job. I mean, that's going to be pretty easy. Those jobs are all over the place. And if you're a non-essential worker and you want to continue working, then you want to spread death. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez claimed on Thursday that Republican governors are outlining plans to quickly begin reopening their states. They are sending vulnerable workers to die with false claims of safety. Well, going back to what Tucker Carlson was talking about, what about the people who work in grocery stores, supermarkets? Are they stacked up like cordwood? No, they are not. So one has to ask the question, why is AOC so determined to smash the American economy and keep it smashed for as long as possible? And I think it's pretty clear. She tweeted, Trump has no plan to get people safely back to work. Actually, he has a plan, which was announced last week, a plan in some detail. The GOP govs like Kemp are sending vulnerable workers to die with false claims of safety. Trump also pushed an unproven, dangerous treatment as a cure and firing experts who want to vet claims. The last thing you care about is safety, and this was in response to a tweet from Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Ocasio-Cortez made headlines this week after promoting a worker boycott during an appearance on Vice's Seat at the Table with Anand Giridharadas. She said, we talk about this idea of reopening society. Only in America does President Trump. When this president tweets about liberation, does he mean go back to work? Yeah. Why do people work? Well, most people work because they must work in order to eat, to have a roof over their heads, and, to buy necessary things. But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez evidently believes that work chosen freely is no different from slavery. But I suppose getting $1,200 a month, with conditions, no, that wouldn't be slavery as well. When we have this discussion about going back or reopening, I think a lot of people should just say, no, we're not going back to that. We're not going back to working 70-hour weeks just so that we can put food on the table and not even feel any sort of semblance of security in our lives. Who are these people who are working 70 hours a week? I mean, I once had a job in radio where I was working 70 hours a week, but it wasn't as if this was mandated. And by the way, setting up vulnerable workers to grind 70 hours a week, what typical work week, 30 to 35 hours in the United States? Does AOC really think that this is the average work week? 70 hours a week for Americans? Is that how many hours that she worked in her bar? Another reference to Andrew Cuomo. He provided the preliminary results of New York's statewide antibody test, which found but 13% across the state had developed antibodies, with 21.2% testing positive for antibodies in New York City. Yes, if the infection rate is 13.9%, then it changes the theories of what the death rate is if you get infected. So end the lockdown, love Gov. Donald Trump Jr. blasts media for acting like we can't open up until COVID is eliminated. And first it was flattening the curve, and now apparently it's eliminating the virus. I mean, the authorities are clearly moving in that direction. He says, yes, he tweeted, self-quarantining and shutting down businesses was done to flatten the curve, not to eliminate COVID. We needed time to prepare for increased hospitalization and obtain PPE. Many of the media are acting like we can't open up until COVID is eliminated, and that may never happen. Yes, exactly. That may never happen. And this contact tracing is literally impossible. What was it? It was size E cup that was carrying on hysterically about, oh, people in a restaurant and they're breathing and oh my God, it's liquid AIDS. Well, if it's liquid AIDS, that means that everyone has been exposed. Yeah, it's going to be around for a long time, probably forever. You know, the COVID virus. How long is the totalitarianism going to last? Matt Hancock, who is Britain's health secretary, unfortunately for Britons, reveals massive plan to test, track, and trace coronavirus victims as a prelude to ending the lockdown, and reveals any essential worker will be able to get a swab test from tomorrow. Okay, so the lockdown in Britain is going to last forever then. Health Secretary Matt Hancock tonight dramatically announced swab tests will be available for up to 7 million Brits who show symptoms of the deadly disease and will no longer be restricted to health workers and hospital patients. And you know what's coming next? Oh, they're going to be telling false negatives. Essentially, oh, we're depending on the tests, but the tests are useless. So the lockdown must continue, well, forever. The Daily Mail reports Britain's daily coronavirus death toll drops 37% from its peak as officials announced 616 more COVID-19 victims, taking Britain's death toll to 18,738. But the number of new infections plateaus. As I explained earlier, these numbers are phony. They're completely phony. They are not daily numbers at all. The media insists on pretending that people who died up to 5 weeks earlier had died the day before. And again, you know, the bodies are being stacked up like cordwood. Let's see, Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, who gives her daily briefings hours before Downing Street, today said she does not expect normality would return this year. Let's see, January, February, March, April. Oh, so more than 8 more months of this lockdown, of this totalitarianism, of the government having the power to arrest anyone who goes outside, with the police having the power to harass people in their own gardens. That's what they call in Britain what Americans would call, you know, front yard or backyard. I don't know. You know, I have to give this more thought. Why is this insanity why does it seem to be greater in Britain than in any other place on earth? Why does the British government seem to want a totalitarian tyranny for the foreseeable future? Again from the Mail, Prince William, Kate Middleton, and their children all wear NHS blue to lead 5th week of Clap for the Carers, as millions of Britons noisily salute key workers from their doorsteps. Yeah, okay. Protect the NHS. This slogan is actually appearing, you know, before ministers when they speak on the podium. Protect the NHS, as Peter Hitchens pointed out. Isn't the point of the NHS to protect the British people? The NHS and its staff is something that William and Kate have put at the heart of their private and professional lives, and this week announced a new initiative to support key workers by providing a dedicated mental health support system, Our Frontline. For the 5th consecutive week, people from around the country stood out on their doorsteps to clap for a minute as a thank you for the brave staff on the front lines battling the coronavirus. Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who is still recuperating from the virus at Chequers, also joined in with fiancée Carrie Simons. Dominic Raab, who is First Secretary with Johnson away from duties, was also filmed clapping, as was Labour leader Keir Starmer. Manufactured consent. Oh, everyone loves the NHS. Everyone must love the NHS. Here's another story from the Mail, and this is truly maddening. An elderly man with dementia received a cruel anonymous letter from a neighbor slamming him for not clapping for the NHS. Gerald Rex, 90, lives alone in Stevenage after his wife of 70 years, Barbara, died in a care home. He is disabled and unable to properly understand the coronavirus pandemic, so he does not go out to clap for NHS workers with the rest of the country every Thursday evening. In recent weeks, he received a threatening letter from an anonymous neighbor branding him a hypocrite for not clapping when NHS doctors and nurses cared for his late wife, who was a Jehovah's Witness. They also said Mrs. Rex belonged to a stupid religion. As I said previously, the situation in Britain and England in particular, it's like Dad's army, only stupider and much nastier. The CEO of Ryanair says his planes won't fly if middle seats must be kept empty for idiotic social distancing rules. Ryanair is an Irish company that revolutionized travel in Britain with their low prices. And I don't know, are you even allowed to bring a purse on without paying extra? Yeah, you don't want to take luggage on a Ryanair. It's basically cattle cars in the sky. And obviously their business model is that 100% of the seats must be filled, otherwise they lose money. And I pointed out this social distancing problem with regard to other things, such as concerts and sporting events. These are, again, predicated on having as many people in the seats as possible, and if social distancing is to be observed, then you are radically reducing the potential size of the audience. In an interview with the Financial Times, the budget airline executive explained plans for Ryanair to resume 80% of flights by September, as long as flying in Europe could resume in July. O'Leary said that the airline intends to gradually increase the number of flights and then reduce them again in the less busy winter season. But he said these plans could be foiled if there were some entirely ineffective social distancing measures, like having middle seats empty, because if middle seats are empty, we're not returning to flying at all. Either the government pays for the middle seat or we won't fly. We can't make money on 66% load factors. Even if you do that, the middle seat doesn't deliver any social distancing, so it's kind of an idiotic idea that doesn't achieve anything anyway. Well, idiotic ideas that don't achieve anything anyway are prioritized now. Here's some good news. Was David Hockney right? David Hockney is the 82-year-old British painter. He is, I suppose, Britain's most best-loved artist. His paintings, which are rather good, actually, sell for large sums of money. French researchers to give nicotine patches to coronavirus patients and frontline workers after lower rates of infection were found among smokers. A French study found that only 4.4% of 350 coronavirus patients hospitalized were regular smokers, and 5.3% of 130 homebound patients smoked. This pales in comparison with at least 25% of the French population that smokes. Researchers theorized that nicotine could prevent the virus from infecting cells, or that nicotine was preventing the immune system from overreacting to the virus. To test this theory, hospitalized coronavirus patients, ICU patients, and frontline workers were given nicotine patches. Well, how about that? Sweden, another story from the Mail. Why is Sweden still faring better in coronavirus crisis than Britain, despite having no lockdown? Well, you've already answered the question. Case-backs claim social distancing and hand washing was enough to flatten curve. As I've reported previously, the number of deaths in Britain has risen dramatically in recent weeks, and we know why that is. People are committing suicide, people are dying of heart attacks and strokes where they otherwise wouldn't have, etc., etc. Sweden is piling up coronavirus cases more slowly than Britain without the need for an economically crippling lockdown. Over the last 3 days, Sweden has added an average of 53 cases per million people, whereas Britain's figure was 66 despite a shutdown which has now been in place for a month. Britain's 3-day average has been consistently higher than Sweden's since March 28th, 5 days after Boris Johnson ordered the lockdown. Well, I would say that another possible reason for this is that the Swedes, or that is to say the ethnic Swedes, are obviously in much better physical shape than your typical Briton. Shops, bars, and restaurants remain open even in worst-hit Stockholm, unlike in Britain, where such businesses have been thrown into crisis. Also, it seems that a wildly disproportionate number of those in Sweden sickened by COVID-19 are non-Swedish immigrants. Professor Carl Hannigan of Oxford University says the UK epidemic started falling from its peak as early as mid-March, when Britain was taking a similar approach to Sweden by encouraging hand washing and social distancing rather than ordering a lockdown. The medic has warned that the damaging effect now of lockdown is going to outweigh the damaging effect of coronavirus in the UK. The UK's rolling average of cases has been worse than Sweden since overtaking it on March the 28th. Herd immunity. That's what we heard. We used to hear about herd immunity, that you wanted herd immunity. And now we're told that herd immunity, no, we can't have that. It's too dangerous. You know, the lockdown saves one life. Well, I suppose it may save one life, but many more lives are going to be lost for reasons which I have already mentioned. In France, this is from Chris Tomlinson of Breitbart, riots erupted across France for the 4th night in a row, spreading to cities and towns with cars set on fire and mobs of locals attacking police and firefighters despite the Wuhan coronavirus lockdown measures. Yes. The French racailles who live in the banlieue, they're known for following the law, for following orders. This is vastly amusing. The riots began on Sunday following an incident between a local on a motorcycle and police in the Paris suburb of Villeneuve-la-Garenne. They have spread to even more areas, with violence continuing to increase. This may be a turning point for France, that the French people may finally have had enough of the racailles and begin to insist that they go back from whence they came. Another story from the Mail. Wuhan laboratory scientists did absolutely crazy things to alter coronavirus and enabled it to infect humans, Russian microbiologist claims. This is Professor Petr Chumakov, who is chief researcher at the Engelhardt Institute of Molecular Biology in Moscow. He said, in China, scientists at the Wuhan laboratory have been actively involved in the development of various coronavirus variants for over 10 years. Moreover, they did this supposedly not with the aim of creating pathogenic variants, but to study their pathogenicity. They did absolutely crazy things, in my opinion. For example, inserts in the genome, which gave the virus the ability to infect human cells. Now, all of this has been analyzed. The picture of the possible creation of the current coronavirus is slowly emerging. He explained there are several inserts, that is, substitutions of the natural sequence of the genome, which gave it special properties. It is interesting that the Chinese and Americans who worked with them published all their works in the open press. I even wonder why this background comes to people very slowly. I think that an investigation will nevertheless be initiated, as a result of which new rules will be developed that regulate the work with the genomes of such dangerous viruses. He said, it's too early to blame anyone. Well, not too early as far as I am concerned. Yes, time for a decoupling. Oh, yes. Breitbart is reporting that the initial executive order of Trump's on immigration was much more expansive and broad. That the initial draft would have suspended a multitude of visa worker programs, stopping the immediate importation of thousands of foreign workers, while more than 26.5 million Americans have filed for unemployment in recent weeks due to the Chinese coronavirus crisis. It is unclear how closely Trump reviewed this draft before signing the final executive order. The contents indicate administration staffers with views more in tune with the president's economic nationalist agenda were involved in its drafting. I'm going to take the same position as Peter Brimelow. He's been at this immigration game for a long time, longer than I have, but, I've been on this immigration game for a long time. And to see such progress, any kind of, even a partial moratorium on immigration, it means that this idea is now on the table, which is great news indeed. There's a particularly sad story from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. A Hodgepodge coffee house owner, Crystal, and that's spelled Krystle, Crystal Rodriguez, received a text from her employee about the sign. A round plaque glued to her Moreland Avenue building outside her restaurant depicting Winnie the Pooh eating a bat with chopsticks below the words, Wuhan Plague. The signs have been popping up around East Atlanta on a variety of buildings and fixtures. Atlanta Police Department's Homeland Security Unit, which investigates bias-motivated crimes, has been notified about the signs, but so far no arrests have been made. It's doing nothing but reinforcing really awful stereotypes, said Rodriguez. I have Asian American friends that said it's allergy season and they're afraid to sneeze in public because all of the hate speech. Yeah, this is a terribly sad story. And I think it would be, one really has to hope and pray that this plaque or similar plaques do not start showing up in other cities. So, what is the latest from Canada? I'm going to be getting to Theatre Thursday real soon now. 42,099 confirmed cases in Canada, 2,146 deaths. Saskatchewan, they've rocketed up to 331 cases and 4 deaths. That's in a province of 1.1 million people. British Columbia, which has a population of 5.1 million, has 1,824 confirmed cases and 94 deaths. And on the island, Vancouver Island, what is happening here? Okay, BC officials announced 4 more COVID-19 deaths, 29 new cases. Yeah, acute care units. I mentioned that, my father is in a long-term care facility and he's been diagnosed with COVID-19, and these are just, vectors of death at these facilities. And as we have seen in British Columbia, where a really substantial amount of the total deaths come from, a handful of long-term care facilities. So what are the numbers on the island? I believe that the island has passed 100 cases. How about that, huh? 100 cases, and there are 2 deaths, and the streets are empty, because that is, that's definitely a proportionate response to such a calamity. We have a racism controversy in Canada now over COVID-19. From the Globe and Mail, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau slammed a Conservative MP's statements questioning the loyalty of Canada's top doctor to her country, as Tory leader Andrew Scheer refused to comment on the remarks. Ontario MP Derek Sloan, who is running to replace Scheer as leader of the Conservative Party, called for Dr. Theresa Tam to be fired in fundraising emails and social media posts this week. Dr. Tam must go. Canada must remain sovereign over decisions, he wrote on Twitter. Does she work for Canada or for China? he asked in a Facebook video posted late Tuesday. Trudeau condemned the remarks in his daily news conference in Ottawa on Thursday. Intolerance and racism have no place in our country. Canada has succeeded because of our diversity. Canada was not a diverse country at all in 1967 when it celebrated its centennial. It's about 97% white. And it was a very successful country indeed. And it lacked many of the severe social problems that Canada now suffers. Diversity has not been good to Canada at all. Trudeau continued, the millions of Canadians of all different backgrounds who are working together, many of them on the front lines to help their fellow Canadians. Yeah, like those workers who deserted the nursing homes in Quebec and Ontario. Yeah, like those people. They deserve better than this from all of this. We need to continue in our resolve to be an open, welcoming, respectful country, and I think all Canadians expect that of every politician. Scheer refused to answer repeated questions about Sloan's comments of whether they were welcome in the Conservative caucus. I would just remind listeners that Dr. Theresa Tam took the WHO line at the beginning. Not a big problem. Coronavirus. We don't even know that it can be communicated from person to person. The real epidemic is xenophobia and stigmatization. Yes. But now the government is saying completely the opposite, but this switcheroo in no way impairs confidence in Dr. Theresa Tam. Okay, and I'm going to move to the last story before theater. Hastings County calls for MP Sloan's removal after racist tweet about Dr. Tam. He's under heavy fire because everyone in Canada loves Dr. Theresa Tam. And I have been highlighting Saskatchewan because there's so few cases and so few deaths. Well, maybe Saskatchewan is going to lead the way in a restoration of sanity in my country. This is from Global News. Saskatchewan will reopen its economy and services in 5 phases starting May the 4th. Premier Scott Moe said that the coronavirus curve has flattened in the province and the reopening will be gradual and methodical. Those plans have now been made public. He says his plan balances reopening the economy while ensuring people remain protected. So let's move on to the Theater Thursday. And we are talking about a movie today, which is from 1957. And it is produced by Frank Tashlin. The credits for the writing are to George Axelrod and Frank Tashlin, but the play that Tashlin adopted, there's very little left of it. There's the title left of it. We discussed George Axelrod before because it was his adaptation of Richard Condon's novel, The Manchurian Candidate. Outstanding movie. And of course, Axelrod wrote the screenplay for another movie we discussed on Thursday, the hilarious How to Murder Your Wife, starring Jack Lemmon and Verna Lisi. And he also made one of the great cult films of the 1960s called Lord Love a Duck, which I hope to get to on Theater Thursday. I want to talk a little bit about Frank Tashlin, who lived from 1913 to 1972. He was born Francis Frederick von Taschlein. And apparently one of the reasons he changed his name was because he feared prejudice because of his German origins. He began as a cartoonist, as an animator. He worked for Van Buren Company, and he joined Termite Terrace at Warner Brothers in 1933. And then he went to Ub Iwerks, Hal Roach, and Columbia Pictures Screen Gems Animation, where he worked on the Fox and the Crow series, and he rejoined Termite Terrace in 1943. He did Porky Pig and Bugs Bunny cartoons, and he also did the Private Snafu educational films. I think you know what snafu means. And these were cartoons which were made for soldiers. So they were far more explicit, vulgar even, in their presentation. Now, he then worked as a gag writer for the Marx Brothers, Lucille Ball, and he wrote scripts for Bob Hope, who was a major movie star at the time. And he worked with Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin. The Girl Can't Help It, a very influential film. And Frank Tashlin, he was, if you get and I recommend this, the Masters of Cinema version of this movie. It's out on Twilight Time, but these Twilight Time issues, they're only a few thousand, and they sell out quickly. And then if you want to get it, astronomical prices are charged for them. The Masters of Cinema has a bunch of extras, an introduction by Joe Dante, which is 7 minutes long. Joe Dante is one of my favorite directors, and Frank Tashlin had an enormous influence on him. I think that Tex Avery obviously had an enormous influence on Joe Dante as well. Jokes, jokes, jokes. Cram in as many jokes as you can. And the Masters of Cinema edition of this has a 44-page booklet and outstanding art, which is based on the poster for the film, which is much the best way to illustrate Blu-ray boxes. So this film, Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter, is about the advertising industry, but it's satire of America in the 1950s, this obsession with consumerism, and I suppose obsession with big breasts as well. That is a running gag in the film because it stars Jane Mansfield, whose breasts were very big indeed. Unlike Alison Brie and Jennifer Connelly, she never starved herself in order to shrink her frame. Jane Mansfield, if you've seen this movie, or if you do see it, you will know that Jane Mansfield was a talented comic actress. But she was known pretty much solely for having large breasts, which is a shame, for being, I don't know, the junior varsity Marilyn Monroe. In fact, Dick Cavett, who was a gag writer before he became, the talk show host, the serious talk show host, he once wrote an introduction for a talk show for Jane Mansfield. Here they are, Jane Mansfield, which is, grossly insulting. This movie is quite prescient because it anticipates the social media nightmare in which we live now. The gag of the film is that Tony Randall, he works at the LaSalle Advertising Agency, and their biggest account is Stay Put lipstick, and they're on the verge of losing this account, which means that our hero, who is Rockwell P. Hunter, played by that great man from Oklahoma, Tony Randall, will lose his job, and Henry Jones, very, very funny in this, who plays Henry Rufus, his boss, would lose his job as well. Henry Jones is taken to drinking in the middle of the day copious amounts of gin because he thinks it's all over. And a fine English character actor who moved to America, appeared in many films. John Williams was his name. He's in Dial M for Murder. He's in Billy Wilder's Sabrina. a very distinctive voice, and older viewers will remember this. 120 music masterpieces, a 4 LP set of classical music excerpts from Columbia House. And then you have the music, it begins, and John Williams was a very distinguished looking man. He said, "I'm sure you recognize this lovely melody as Stranger in Paradise, but did you know that the original theme is from the Polyvetzian Dance No. 2 by Borodin? So many of the tunes of our well-known popular songs were actually written by the great masters, like these familiar themes." It just played for years and years and years. And he's the big boss, and he's the son of the founder. And it turns out that he's not happy because he thinks that he will never live up to the expectations that his father had for him. And there's a gag, a really good gag, about a portrait of the old man, LaSalle Sr., who appears to become more malevolent each time this portrait in LaSalle Jr.'s office is shown. So we have Tony Randall, and he wants to save his job because he is engaged to a girl named Jenny, played by Betsy Drake, who was later married to Cary Grant in real life. And she's a sensible, intelligent woman who later becomes obsessed with the need to have bigger breasts, as does Tony Randall's niece, who lives with him. And there was a joke slogan at the time for women. There was a belief that certain exercises could make breasts bigger. And the joke was that maybe this actually happened, that the women would chant, "We must, we must, we must increase our bust." Now, of course, these days, it is a huge buttocks which are preferred, and that is a very bad development indeed. So Jane Mansfield in this film, she plays a woman called Rita Marlowe, who is very clearly based on Marilyn Monroe. And her boyfriend, who is played by Mickey Hargitay, whom James Mansfield later married, resulting in a child, Mariska Hargitay, who's on one of those Law and Order shows. He plays Bobo Braganansky, the muscle man in the jungle, sort of Tarzan knockoff, and he has a wandering eye. And Rita Marlowe, Jane Mansfield, decides that she is having no more of it, so she is fleeing Los Angeles for New York City. And Rita Marlowe is famed for having the oh so kissable lips. And Tony Randall puts 2 and 2 together and comes up with a proposal to make Rita Marlowe the public face, the endorser of Stay Put lipstick. And the big boss completely ignores Tony Randall in the hall. He cuts him. He later apologizes for that and explains that, it's one of the things that's expected of people like me, that we cut people, the little people. But the head of Stay Put lipstick is enamored of this idea because, it's a really good idea. Now, the niece, Rock Hunter's niece, is absolutely besotted with Rita Marlowe and is the president of the local fan club chapter. And she skips school to greet the plane at, as it was then called, Idlewild Airport. And Tony Randall sees this on television. You see, in this world, all of these things which are now commonplace, celebrity did this, went there, or etc. This is covered in real time on TV, and it's covered in the newspapers. This becomes a #1 story around the world and in various languages, and there's jokes at the expense of the French and of the communists. So Tony Randall has his in. that he's very angry with his daughter for skipping school, and she's shown up on television, which is for some reason broadcasting live from the airport, but nobody knows where Rita Marlowe is staying, except that the niece overheard the instructions to the chauffeur, so she knows. And Tony Randall has to get in there and to win her over. And this is where things take a twist, because Jane Mansfield is looking to make Bobo jealous. And of course, the best way to make a man jealous is to start again with another man. And she decides that even though Rockwell P. Hunter is a lowly advertising copywriter, he'll do. And she initiates a completely fake relationship with him, except that she is Jane Mansfield and she's a very good kisser, and we see that Rock Hunter is tempted, and she pushes this to the absolute limit, that she calls him lover doll. And so Rock Hunter becomes famous across America. He is the lover doll. And of course, at his office, where the women, except his fiance, who works in the office, they had largely ignored him. It turns out that there were all of these gorgeous women at the advertising agency who are now terribly interested in Rockwell P. Hunter. And as they say, it's funny because it's true. A lot of men have had that experience, that women ignore them, and then word gets out that they have a good-looking girlfriend, and suddenly all of these women are interested in you. I know it's happened to me. There's a lot of talk about psychiatry in this film. One gets the impression that in the 1950s, everyone associated with Hollywood was in analysis several times a week, even. And the use of this in the film is more important than one might think at first viewing. There's a lot of psychological concepts and Freudian concepts which are exploited in the film. After Rock Hunter becomes a lover doll, then the whole world wants him, and Irving LaSalle Jr. wants him as well. And he is moving up, up, up in the company, and his boss, Henry Rufus, is moving up, up, up in the company as well. He had told Rita Marlowe that he was a vice president at the company. Well, that was a lie, but he is made a vice president, and he is given the key to the executive washroom. Angelic music plays, and it's Tony Randall is reduced to tears by this. He wanted it. He never thought it would happen. But being lover doll, well, it's not all beer and Skittles, because his fiance is furious with him because he has apparently thrown her over for some hussy from Hollywood. He protests that this is not the case, but we have lots of examples of physical violence from her at him, which was perfectly acceptable in the 1950s movies, because, well, I suppose it's not acceptable. Domestic violence is domestic violence. It doesn't matter if it's a woman doing it to a man. But to see, a plant pot being dropped on a man's head, it's funny. It's funny. There's no great injury there. Perhaps we're not allowed to show this because, it reinforces the stereotype that, women are hotheads. And of course, we all know that that's not true at all. There's a theme of true love running through this, that Rita Marlowe has a minder, played by Joan Blondell, who was a very significant blonde bombshell in her day. And she pines for a lost love, and there's lots of jokes about milk. There's sort of a Pavlovian milk response because her great love was a milkman, and this joke pays off later on. And it turns out that Rita Marlowe herself, she had this great attraction to a fellow called George Schmidlap, who gave her start in the business, but for some reason they never really came together. And of course, we know that that Rock Hunter is that his fiancée is the right woman for him, and so all of these things must be maneuvered. We must get the right man with the right woman. The fourth wall is broken in this film spectacularly, and in the opening credits, where you have Tony Randall playing the instruments of the famous 20th Century Fox theme, one at a time. And he introduces the film, only he can't remember the title. And the ladies of the film, they tell us what the title is. And we are given a bunch of parodies of ads, such as would be shown on television in the 1950s. Frank Tashlin took a dim view of this. Clearly, what are you being sold? You're being sold that, there's a hole in your soul that can only be filled with consumer products, and that the possession of a certain refrigerator or vacuum cleaner will make you a happy, well-adjusted, content American. But halfway through the film, the fourth wall is broken again, and Tony Randall comes out to explain that people who watch television have short attention spans, and since we're at the hour mark, we're going to have to take a break here so that television viewers can compose themselves, because the movie lasts longer than an hour. Now, I should explain that television, which started to become ubiquitous in the United States in the late 1940s, created a crisis for the movie business, a crisis from which it never really recovered. In response, the movie studios moved to widescreen. Previously, they used the so-called Academy ratio of 4:3, but then they went to 16:9 or even thinner ratios so that you could see more. They adopted systems such as Technicolor, which gave really spectacular results. Cinerama and the like, 70 millimeter. TV is small, the movies are big. They also invested very heavily in sophisticated sound equipment. And at the hour mark, when Tony Randall interrupts the movie, he says that, we're going to have to make this palatable for you television viewers. And so they shrink the screen on the movie so that we're just seeing the tiny little square, tiny little box, rectangle, and then various effects, flipping up, flipping down, waving across the screen, etc., etc. It is very amusing indeed, and the movie is kind of a declaration of war on television and all it stands for. Of course, it's ironic, that a great many people, I suppose Martin Scorsese is the most famous example, and my experience was rather similar, that my introduction to movies was, of course, on the small screen. I suppose it used to be it was commonplace in America once for teenagers to go to the movies every week or more than once a week. That movie attendance in the 1930s was absolutely gargantuan. It was the done thing. Every American went to the movie theater at least once a week, but then it started falling from that point. And again, with television, why do you need to leave the house? And this movie, Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter, it's an examination of the plight of the movies. And Tashlin has made a movie which looks absolutely absolutely great, which is full of great jokes, great performances. It is, in effect, an ad for movies themselves. Now, I mentioned that this was a satire, and I guess it's a satire of the man in the gray flannel suit, the organization man. That Tony Randall has this desire to move up, keep moving up on Madison Avenue, because that's what he is supposed to do. When he gets his dream job, he realizes that is not, in fact, what he wants to do. And he doesn't even want to live in New York City. Again, I should point out that the New York of the 1950s was very different from what it became only a decade later. New York City was just the epitome of glamour. And you can see it in films like Rear Window. You can see it in Sweet Smell of Success. That just over a decade after this film was made, or just 10 years, that New York City started to become it was just considered to be a garbage dump. You see this, if you see the movie The French Connection, French Connection is as if, okay, how can we make New York look the absolute worst? But New York just seems so glamorous in the 1950s, and this is expressed very well in this film. And Tony Randall is miserable. He's miserable as lover doll. He's miserable as vice president. He wants to get away from it all, and he does. And he gets the girl, and he gets the wife that he wants, and he gets the life that he wants. And as does Rita Marlowe, and even Violet, played by Joan Blondell. She gets a man too. She gets Henry Rufus. There's a big surprise at the end of the film, which I won't spoil. This is a really delightful film. You know, these are pretty depressing times. If you want to cheer yourself up, put this movie on, and it will cheer you up, and it will give you something to think about as well. So let's take a final look at the chat. Eternal Fisherman says, from dishwasher to millionaire already came up in the 19th century, all about the Benjamins. John Berkshire says, the left thinks Russia is evil, the right thinks Russia is okay, and China is the real enemy. I don't have any problem with Russia. Russia wants to be friendly with the West, but for various reasons, apparently we can't be friends with Russia. We have to be friends with China, which is just this absolutely monstrous regime. Absolutely monstrous regime. John Berkshire says, liberalism is so powerful it has even influenced conservatism. Modern day conservatives are just liberals who lag behind 10 years. Yeah, but you see that many of these leading conservatives, such as David French, they've come out of the closet, as it were, and they're referring themselves as classical liberals, you know, or Manchester liberals. And this is not conservatism. This is materialism. It's pure materialism. And conservatives are supposed to, you know, look beyond materialism. Eternal Fisherman says, conservatism isn't a genuine ideology, but more a stance. But what is that stance? When we have size E cup railing against Trump, oh, and everybody must stay in forever, and Bill Barr is a bad man, because Bill Barr apparently takes the Constitution and its liberties seriously. Oh, yeah. Okay, so that's it. That's it for tonight. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in. And if you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. If you'd like to support the show, my PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Tomorrow we are going to be discussing Matthew Stoller's book, Goliath, which is about the evils of monopoly, the old monopolies and the new monopolies. And what is coming up on Theatre Thursday? On April 30th, The Science of Sleep by Michel Gondry from 2006. It's one of my very favorite films, and it's a very personal film to me because the protagonist of the film is very much like me. On May 7th, we have a film set in Scotland by Ronald Neame from 1960. It is called Tunes of Glory and stars Alec Guinness, as well as a young Susanna York, one of the great 60s British beauties. On May 14th, 7.62mm Full Metal Jacket from 1987 by Stanley Kubrick. And on May 21st, we have Alison Brie's semi-autobiographical movie called Horse Girl. As always, I will leave you with the benediction that in these days of total social atomization, that you, my viewers and listeners, somehow manage to find some real human contact. Good night.